Hello and welcome to Bookmas Day 3, if I'm not mistaken. It is Day 3 of Bookmas, and that means that we are already at the end of the first week of December and therefore a quarter of the way into Bookmas, which is insane. Time goes by so quickly when we're having fun, and I myself am having a lot of fun with those videos. I hope you guys are too. Seeing as we're a week into December, I figure what better time than to do a little recap of all the books that I read in November. Update you guys on how it's going, seeing as well I did the November TBR video with you guys, so it's only fair you see what I thought of those books that I picked out. But yeah, so I thought today it could be fun. I'd just sit down and yap to you about books, as if that's not what I do every day on this channel. This way I can give a slightly more in-depth opinion on each of these books, and I can give you my rating, tell you what I thought about them, if I like them, dislike them. But that's all coming in the video. I don't want to give you any spoilers of what's ahead. Seeing as it's the end of the first week of December, I think we all deserve a nice warm hot chocolate or coffee, whatever's your preference, so grab that and let's get right on into the video. At the beginning of the month when I did my November TBR video, I gave myself a TBR of 6 books. Honestly, in a month I could read more than that, and like I probably would on a regular month. I'm at the other end of a reading slump, so I don't want to challenge myself too much. I know that it would set me slumping again if I gave myself like 10 books to read, because it would just look like a lot of books. Plus I had some midterms last month, so it was a busy month. So the TBR that I chose, you can see it down here, I did not complete it. I read 5 out of the 6 books. So the one that I didn't read is The Bridge Kingdom, and it's still here on my shelf waiting to be read. Sometimes that just happens, is that during the month my mood changes or I just don't get time to read the books. However, we did read 6 months in the... We read 6 months, well done. We did read 6 books in the month of November, which I'm honestly happy with because some of them were quite big books, and like I said, I had a lot going on in the month of November. I would have liked to have read 7, like even just 1 book more, but can't always get what you want, as the Rolling Stones once said. The first book that I read in November was The 10,000 Doors of January by Alex E. Harrow. The beginning of November, so the beginning of this month, was when I decided that I wanted to start doing BookTube. And I always find it very hard to enjoy reading the same way. Both adds a negative and a positive aspect to my reading. It kind of makes me feel pressure to read more books because I'm posting about all the books I read. So I feel like if I don't read enough books, then I've got nothing to talk about. But at the same time, it really pushes me back into my reading, my love of reading. So there's really a negative and a positive to it. So it does make me read more books, but it also puts a lot of pressure. I put a lot of pressure on myself to then read more books, so it's a double-edged sword. So at the start of the month I was struggling to get through this because the beginning was a bit slow, so I was reading it quite slowly because I also had a lot going on, but then I was like kind of berating myself for doing that because I was like, I've just made the decision to make a booktube, I need to read more books. So it was a struggle at the beginning of this month, I'm not gonna lie, but eventually I managed to get into this book and I loved it. It was a 4-star read for me. I thought it was beautiful, much like all of Alex E. Harrow's books. She manages to completely immerse you in the world, in the characters. You get really invested. You're fully absorbed in the world. I don't know how to describe it, but I don't always get that with other books. I do always find the start to be a bit slow, but once I get past that 100-page mark, I am fully invested, I'm fully absorbed. So in this book we follow our main character January, who discovers that she can like create doors that take her from one place to another, so into different worlds or just different places in the same world. And at the same time we also follow her parents' story, and we find out how they met through one of these sort of doors. Alex E. Harrow was a historian before she started writing books, and you can honestly tell because these books, you can tell they've been ridiculously researched to a point that, like I said, you just get so fully immersed because the world building and the character building and the history building just feels so real. It feels like you're really there and like you're living this experience with them. I gave this a 4 stars. I've read 3 Alex E. Harrow books so far. One was a 5-star and the other 2 have both been 4 stars for me. So she is definitely one of my favourite authors, and I cannot recommend reading her books enough. If you're looking for something kind of like a literary history-based fantasy, because all of her books are deeply embedded in history, then I recommend Alex E. Harrow. She is honestly an author to read. The next book I read during the month I actually do not have because I've already unhauled it, and that is How to Lose the Time War by, wait a second, by Amal El Motta, sorry I'm pronouncing that wrong, and Max Gladstone. So I picked this book off my TBR because I'd had it for a while and I realised it was one of those purchases where you think you're going to really like the book and you buy it almost blind, and then you actually find out more about the book and you realise, yeah, maybe this isn't for me, but you've bought it so you have to read it. And luckily it was only about 200 pages, it was a novella, so it wasn't too painful, but it took me like 4 or 5 days to read a 200-page book, and normally I could read 200 pages in 2 days. So I think that tells you enough about what I thought of it. But basically in this you follow two main characters, Red and Blue, as they send each other letters. So they're both time traveling agents and they are fighting a war. They're on opposite sides of the war, and you follow their letters that they send each other as they slowly fall in love. While on paper that sounds like a beautiful, lovely, heartbreaking story, in reality it was just really confusing. It was definitely, and I cannot disagree with this, it was beautifully written. If I was the sort of person who annotated books just because I think the sentence was beautiful, I would have like annotated the hell out of that book. There was no plot line, I felt, because basically what would happen is you'd get, so you had Red, you had a glimpse, a 2-page glimpse of what Red was doing, and then you'd get the letter that Blue had sent, and then you'd switch to Blue, you get a 2-page thing of what Blue was doing, which had nothing to do with what Red was doing. You get the letter that Red had written back to them, and that was just back and forth. The only linear continuation was with the letters, and it was just, it wasn't my type of book. It was definitely, I don't know, it almost felt like it was trying really hard to be intellectual, and it was intellectual, but in a way that made me feel really stupid, because I just didn't find the storyline interesting and easy to follow. I did not understand that book, and I have no shame in admitting it, because I think it was written at a very, very high caliber, but I can recognise that it was beautifully written at least. So even if it had nothing to say, at least it said nothing beautifully. And if that's not poetic, then I don't know what is. But yeah, so I gave it a 2.5. Honestly, it probably would be a 2-star if I really had to think about it, because I didn't like the storyline, but at least it was well written. I could recognise it was both well and beautifully written, but honestly it's probably a 2-star. So yeah, so I wasn't a big fan of that, and I immediately unhauled it because I don't have room in my bookshelves to keep books that I do not like, nor do I really want to be keeping books I do not like, because that's just consumerism and there's no point in that. I have enough books anyway. Next up, I read a book that luckily was 10 times better than How to Lose a Time War, and that was Somewhere Over the Sea, which is the second book in the Cerulean Sea duology by TJ Klune. So like I said in my November TBR, I read this book, the first book, back in, I think it was April, maybe March, and I just really enjoyed it. It was like a cozy, feel-good, very nice book, and I didn't really think much about it later. But this one, I loved this one. There was generally a moment when I almost cried from happiness. To be fair, I'm an emotional person and I cry easily in books, but still, I almost cried from happiness. Obviously the second book, so I can't really tell you the plot of this book, but in the first book we follow Linus Baker, who goes to an orphanage run by Arthur Parnassus, and in that orphanage there are 6 or 7, I can't remember, 6 or 7 magical children. So it's an orphanage for magical children, and basically Linus Baker's sent there at first because the government thinks that Arthur Parnassus is dangerous and is training these children to become his army. But actually Linus gets there and realises that Arthur Parnassus just really loves these children, they really love him, and they don't believe that magical beings should be controlled and watched by the government. And so Linus falls in love with Arthur, and it is beautiful. And then the second book is a continuation of that story. I felt this book was 10 times better than the first one. I loved it. The praise for TJ Klune, like, you know, the section where they have other authors say a good thing about this author in this book. V.E. Schwab has said that it's like being wrapped up in a big gay blanket, and I agree with that. This book is the book embodiment of a warm hug, and I really loved it. I gave it 4.5 stars. It didn't have that 5-star feeling, and maybe because I also didn't like the first one as much, so it wasn't a 5-star book, but it could have been. It's one of those books where you didn't need a second book, but oh my god, am I so glad I got it, because I love this book so much. It's a really good autumn read, I feel. Not only is the cover kind of giving autumn vibes, but also just because it feels like a warm, cozy hug, it feels like the kind of book that after a long day at work, you want to come home, curl up by the fireplace with a nice warm drink and read this. So I loved this book, and I'm so happy that I decided to continue this series because this was just beautiful. Next up, we read another big book that I also did very much enjoy, and that was Never by Jessa Hastings. A lot of the books I read this month were slow starts, and I do also think that's because I'm coming out of a slump, so it takes me longer to get properly into a book and attached to a book than it would in normal times. And this book, the way it is written is very specific, and I don't know if that's Jessa Hastings or just this book in particular, because I haven't yet read any other Jessa Hastings books. As you know from my December TBR video, Bookmas Day 1, I'm going to be reading Magnolia Parks in December, if I stick to my TBR, of course. So the beginning took me a while to get into it, and then our main male character, Jamison. First off, I thought it was called Jameson, so I pronounced that wrong in the TBR video, but it's Jamison. He speaks with such a strong, it's not quite Scottish, it's not quite Irish. It's described in the book as being kind of a mix of accents, and even the character doesn't know exactly what accent it is, but it's really strong and it's written really strongly. So at first, that completely took me out of the book, and every time I'd read a sentence he says, and that was annoying because he was like our main male character, he was one of the love interests, it really took me out of the book and it completely kind of ruined any charm he might have. But honestly, after a couple chapters of hearing him speak, or rather reading him speak, you honestly get used to it. There were still times when he'd say a sentence and I kind of like, wait a second, what did you just say? That accent is making no sense. Honestly, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be at the beginning. When there was first a chapter in a conversation with him, I was like, this is going to be a struggle. But honestly, I did not notice it. And towards the end, I was giggling and kicking my feet for Jamison. Also, oh my god, I went into this book fully convinced it was a standalone. And so it makes so much sense that I get to the end of this book, I see that I'm on the last page and I'm like, what the hell, this can't be right. There's no way the book ends like this. This concluded nothing. This is terrible. And so I gave it a 3 stars despite having loved it up until that point. I was like, no, this is terrible. This is 3 stars. And then I went online, I did some digging. I found out that it's apparently part of a planned series, but that nothing more has been announced aside from that it's planned to be in a series. And so at the moment, I haven't changed my rating. So I've gave this a 3 stars purely because of the ending. If I'd have gone into it knowing it was going to be a first book in a series, the rating would be higher. But because we've got no further info, I'm going to keep it 3 stars until book 2 gets announced. And then honestly, it'll go up to a 4.5 or a 5 stars because I loved this book. Basically in this book we follow Daphne, who is one of the Darling girls, so she's like the great granddaughter or the granddaughter of Wendy, so who originally got kidnapped by Peter Pan, and she gets taken to Neverland by Peter Pan, except she realizes that Peter Pan is kind of a douchebag. And so basically she spends this book going back and forth between Peter Pan and then Jamison Hook, who's Hook's son. And so at times that does get annoying, but I just think Jessa Hastings writes it in a way where you fully understand the mental state of the character, like you 100% see where she's going to, and she writes toxic relationships. I'm not gonna lie, they are both toxic relationships. She writes them so well in a way that you as a reader see the problem, but you fully also understand how our main character does not. I don't know how to describe it, but I just really like this. I thought it was a really interesting book, and I thought it was really, really well written. So I hope that book 2 gets announced soon, because first off, what was that ending? And second off, that I can finally put the rating to where it's supposed to be, because this is not a 3-star book. This is probably a 4.5 to 5-star book. But just because the ending, I cannot change the rating until I know that there is a continuation. So please, fingers crossed, let there be a continuation sometime soon. I then read another book that had been sitting on my shelf for a while that I forced myself to read because I felt that it wasn't really my book, and once again I was right. So it's good to know that I know my own reading taste. And that was How to Kill Your Family by Bella Mackie. Now I had such high hopes for this book. I was so excited. I got it on Vinted, and I only get a book on Vinted if I know that I really, really want to read it. Otherwise I'll just pick up in a bookstore. I kept seeing another book by this author in bookstores and never this one, so I caved and got it on Vinted. And I am also going to be unhauling this book because I did not enjoy it. I gave it again a 2.5 stars. I was honestly disappointed by this. I thought I'd like it a lot more than I did. I just found our main character really, really unlikable, and it's really hard to enjoy a book when the main character is unlikable, especially because this isn't the type of book I would normally read. So maybe if it had been a typical romancy book and I hadn't loved the main character, I would have had less difficulty with it just because it was an aesthetic I was familiar with. But this being a book genre I don't normally read, by a new author, and with a character that I don't really like, it was really a struggle to get through. So this took me, again, way longer than it should have to get through. So I think that's also why this month I didn't read as much, because I did read some books that I just did not enjoy, which made them really slow reads and a struggle to get through. But basically in this, we follow Grace Bernard, who makes a decision, as the cover tells you, to kill her family because her father's side of the family found out her mother was pregnant and immediately shunned her despite them being really rich. They didn't want the drama that came with because her father was married at the time and had an affair with her mother, and so they didn't want all the drama that would have come with knowing that he had an affair with someone who I think was also about 10 years younger than him or something. It's a whole thing. The principles sounded really fun, kind of like Yellowface maybe, where you know that the main character's doing wrong things, but it's written in such a way that you find yourself sometimes rooting for them, and then you realise, what am I doing? This is crazy. This is a horrible person. And I hope this book would be that. It was not. It was just, what is this main character doing? She's actually kind of annoying. I don't know how to describe it, I just didn't like her. There were many moments when I'd read her thoughts and I'd be like, no, stop this. Also, I was so hoping that the ending would fix it, because I can have an unlikable person if the ending does a good thing, in whatever way, whatever form that would take. But this ending just felt like it came out of left field. Like, there were clues to it, but it just felt really random. It was like the author started off with a thing and then halfway through was like, wait a second. And so she went back and changed some elements, but it still didn't feel fully logical. I don't know, I just had a hard time with this book. I didn't like the main characters. I didn't really like any of the characters, honestly. They were all really annoying. They were all really mean to each other. I mean, obviously it's about killing your family, but I didn't like this book and I will be unhauling it. The last book that I read this month, which was a reread, is The Book of Dust by Philip Pullman. So this is partially the reason why I didn't read The British Kingdom, also because I didn't feel like getting into a full series and The British Kingdom is 4 books. So instead I read a 700-page book. There's logic in that, don't you worry. So this is the second book in the Book of Dust trilogy, so The Secret Commonwealth, and it is Philip Pullman's sequel trilogy to the Golden Compass trilogy. So I read that when I was younger, as I spoke about in my book series I've not finished video, so I won't talk too much about this, but basically the third book in the trilogy, so this book here, came out at the beginning of the month, I think, and so I wanted to read this because I couldn't remember this book. I remember the first book very well, but I couldn't really remember this book, and so I wanted to read this before reading this. So this will probably be the first book I actually read in December. It's just not my TBR video, but I will definitely read it because I finished one just at the end of the month, and oh my god, I'd forgotten how much I loved this character and this world. So basically this is the second book. In the first book it's set 10 years before the Golden Compass, we follow Malcolm, and then in this book it's set 10 years after the Golden Compass, and we followed both Lyra and Malcolm and see how they meet again when like Lyra's all grown up. And basically, yeah, it's kind of a journey, as in it starts off in Oxford and then they end up in like Central Asia, I believe. So they literally travel the whole globe. And honestly, Philip Pullman's writing is, I don't know, he has a way of writing conversations that in any other book would feel very informal, very stilted, very fake. And yet somehow in this book, maybe because it just fits with the rest of the writing, or it fits with the universe, or just it's what I've grown to get used to in Philip Pullman books, it doesn't. It just feels like that is how the characters speak. And I cannot really explain it. It's such a almost a frank way of speaking, but they're not always telling the truth. But the way they phrase their sentences, the way conversations are in this book is absolutely fascinating to me, because it would not fit in a single other book that I've read, but in this it works so well, and I just don't know how that happens. But I really enjoyed this book. It was so much fun reading this as a 20-year-old, as our main character is 20, and having read the original books when our main character is 12, when I was 12 or 13, is actually like a crazy experience because I grew up with this character. That's how it feels. It's like I'm catching up to her after 10 years apart, and it is so good. I read this book quite quickly. I read it in maybe 4 days and it's 700 pages, so that's not bad. I will say about this book, the one thing, and again, it wasn't a problem. I think, honestly, Philip Pullman writes crazy stuff and it just doesn't bother me. Because it was a travel book, so sometimes they'd be in a city, something would happen, and it would give you a tiny bit of information for like continuing the story, but at the same time you're just like, the whole thing was so random, we couldn't have got that information any other way. And it's almost like mini stories within the overarching story. And I think that works really well with what this book is, which is The Secret Commonwealth. So The Secret Commonwealth is kind of the hidden world of like fairies and all magical beings and that sort of thing that you kind of can't see unless you're really looking for it, you know what I mean? So this book being The Secret Commonwealth does make the little weird episodes make sense because they're all related to The Secret Commonwealth. So they may seem random, but like related to the title of the book, it makes sense, if that sentence makes sense. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I cannot wait to go to the third book. It is going to be so good. The conclusion of this trilogy, I just know Philip Pullman knows how to write a trilogy. The Golden Compass trilogy was so good. I loved that when I was younger. The only thing I will say that I'm not liking about this is it is looking like we're going to be getting romance between Malcolm and Lyra, and I don't like that because, for one, in the first book, Lyra was a newborn baby and Malcolm was 11 and he spent a lot of time with her. And then for two, well, because that age gap, there is a 10-year age gap in this book, and it just makes me uncomfortable because he knew her when she was a baby and now they may get together. And I just don't really like that, but I don't know yet. I'm really hoping that that won't happen, but who knows? And maybe it will happen in a way that I like, but at the moment I feel kind of uncomfortable with it. And nothing has happened in this book, so we'll have to read the third book to find out. But I just really love this book. I gave it a 4.5 stars. It was just so fun and so very Philip Pullman. So here we have it. The 6 books that I read this month, honestly, it was a real roller coaster month. I had some books that I really liked and some books that I really disliked, but I do feel like that is a side effect of forcing myself to read my TBR. It means that there are books that are on my TBR for a reason, and that reason is just because when I bought them my reading taste was maybe a bit different than it is now, or I just know my reading taste better, and so sometimes if they're on the TBR for a long time, it is a sign. But that doesn't mean I won't read them anyway, because it's just a book. It's max a week of my life that I will spend reading something I don't like, but that will teach me something interesting or could have some interesting elements. So I feel it's important to read books you don't like because it helps you grow as a reader. And I think it's important to read books you don't think you'll like because you never know and you may end up loving them. But anyway, enough yakking. These are the 6 books that I read in the month of November. I hope you enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun recapping and yapping about these books. It was good to get my thoughts out, like to actually think about it myself. I feel like this kind of video is actually really helpful because it means that I can just kind of speak and say what I need to say, and that helps you figure things out and how I feel about these books, especially in retrospect. So yeah, this was a decent reading month. It wasn't the best, but it wasn't the worst. And yeah, I hope you guys have been enjoying these Bookmas videos. Today was day 3, so I will see you in a couple days for Bookmas day 4. Until then, have a nice weekend and I will see you soon.